one of the things that annoys me about a lot of the criticism of decisions around quarterbacks and signings and draft picks is this idea that there is a right choice and a wrong choice. And in reality, there are dozens and dozens of potentially right choices and dozens of potentially wrong choices. It's just, okay, what's the best option for me right now? And how can I maximize this right now? And that's why, when we talked to Jeff Ireland at the Senior Bowl, we asked him kind of what traits he looks for in quarterbacks. And I thought his answer was interesting because if you kind of base his answer against the reality of what has happened with the Saints his entire tenure, it doesn't seem to line up.
Quarterbacking is one of those positions where it's an all-in evaluation. It's not just me as the college director. It's not just the coach as a head coach. It's all in. We're looking for a very consistent evaluation on the quarterback position. We have to all be in on that particular evaluation and say, hey, yeah, we all want this guy. So whether he's a running quarterback, a dual threat quarterback, I mean, ideally, if you're asking me directly, I like the dual threat quarterbacks, but they got to be able to throw when they're hurt. So when they can't move their legs, they got to be able to throw. But I do like the dual threats guys.
Have you ever looked at a Saints quarterback room and been like amazed at all the dual threat guys not named Taysom Hill? Like that's the interesting thing to me about those comments is, so your college scouting director really likes dual threat quarterbacks, but this is a team that has always seemed to end up with statuesque quarterbacks on game day. Now you're not going to argue with Drew Brees, right? But you are going to look at the last 2 years and say, well, why haven't we prioritized dual threat quarterbacks if our scouting director is saying that dual threat quarterbacks are the way to go? I think that's interesting. And it does kind of show you the disconnect between the scouting department and like, what do I think I can win with on game day?
Who was the Ohio State quarterback they kept picking up and letting go?
JT Barrett.
Yeah, there you go.
Dual threat dream.
No, you don't think of Jameis, obviously, Teddy Bridgewater as these, I
wouldn't call them dual threats. Like they can move. They're not slow, or well, I take that back. Jameis is a little slow. But like they can run. It's really just a question of like they are not guys you call designed runs for. Let's put it that way. I think that's a good way to kind of delineate between a dual threat and a pocket passer type quarterback. Is, do you ever call designed runs? And if the answer is no, it is not a dual threat quarterback.
No, we like you said, besides the name Taysom Hill, we have not seen that.
Yeah. But I do think it's interesting. And now you have this question about, okay, are you going to trade for Derek Carr? Also not a dual threat guy, but I do think that when you're trying, so we talked about the fourth quarter comebacks thing. And I think that is a real metric that you want to look at when you're deciding on a quarterback, because a guy who can get the ball down 4 with 2.5 minutes and go down and win a game. I don't care what the stats say. Like that's a skill in and of itself, right? Like you can see Tom Brady just mess around for 3.5 quarters of a football game. And then, the rubber hits the road and he is a different guy and he goes and wins that game. I think you have seen Derek Carr be that guy in moments. And it's one of the reasons that I think you watch Derek Carr. And I can say this for myself personally. Like I've watched Derek Carr play. The game, the Raiders and the Chargers last year, where he was just dueling with Justin Herbert. Like you watch games like that and you're like, man, this guy's really good. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, well, he just has middling statistics. And I think that's why, because the way he does it is a little different. Whereas like, Jameis 1 will love me for pointing this out. A vast majority of Andy Dalton's stats came in garbage time. And like, it's hard to just look at the numbers and delineate, okay, when did this game actually matter? What were these stats accumulated when you were within 3 points, when you were extending a lead, or were they accumulated when you were down 2 touchdowns in Arizona? Because that's where a lot of Andy Dalton's best game was, in Arizona, when a majority of that game they were down 2+ scores and had already thrown 2 pick sixes. Like that's a big chunk of Andy Dalton's stats from this year. And I know that because he won me a fantasy matchup that week. So that's one part of it. The other part of it that I think people are taking for granted is, while Derek Carr's athleticism might not be something you think about right off the bat, compared to Andy Dalton, he might as well be an Olympic sprinter. Like he's not a guy who's going to run for a ton of yards, but he's going to extend plays athletically and give you a chance to succeed on plays that don't work perfectly from a blocking perspective. And that is something the Saints did not have this past season. If the blocking didn't hold up, you were shot. And I think that's something that you can look at and say, yes, Derek Carr does give you a bit more from an athletic profile perspective to kind of make that determination.
Am I crazy to think that, oh my goodness, okay, you get Derek Carr quarterback, the possibility is there still of retaining Michael Thomas? I mean, I know we saw this restructured contract and a lot of speculation was to be that it was him being on the way out kind of deal, but just to think of now, in dreamland here, picturing Derek Carr throwing to Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and then you have also a guy like Rashid Shaheed with Alvin Kamara, hopefully for some games this season, and Taysom Hill. Just the offense around him. It's pretty exciting to think about. I think at least heading in as a week one offense.
From a contract perspective, I would say no, and the reason being. Thomas? Yes. And the reason being is, like, while I say in the past segment, like, you can make the money work with Andy Dalton, with Derek Carr, it will make things more complicated. And bringing back Michael Thomas with his contract the way it is right now would just not work. Yeah. Like, you're going to have to find ways to create money. And that would be a way, like, the reason his contract is structured the way it is because he's going to, you're going to let him go. And like, he reduced his salary down to $1 million. And in doing that, like, he put a poison pill in there, which is like another $30 million bonus if he's on the contract, if he's on the team next year. So I don't think that's going to happen. Now, maybe you can come to terms and like bring him back on a different deal, but I don't know. Like, he would have to really want to play with Derek Carr, I think, and really be motivated to make that happen. And maybe he is, but I don't necessarily see that. Now, just to kind of double down on this athletic profile thing, and granted, I appreciate that he's 31 years old now, right? Derek Carr is, and his combine numbers do not reflect his athleticism currently. Like, he's dealt with some injuries, and that's slowed him down a little bit. But like, I would imagine that when I say that, people are looking at me with like, I have two heads with like, he was never that athletic, and like, you're wrong. Because if you go back to the combine, this dude ran a 4.69 40. That's fast. Like, that's good speed. Like, that's good athleticism for a quarterback. And it's like, he kind of is this like kind of like dorky looking guy. And like, you wouldn't assume that he's out there like spinning the wheels like he was. But like, for example, I went through and I looked up the 40 times of all the NFL quarterbacks, or at least the majority of them that I could find. Not everyone ran the 40. But 4.69, there was only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 current quarterbacks that ran faster than him. Current starting quarterbacks that ran faster than him at their combine, right? The fastest was Russell Wilson, Jalen Hurts, Geno Smith. They all ran 4.59s. So like, even that, it's like not blowing them away. Right. So the others, Josh Allen, 4.62, Ryan Tannehill, who was a wide receiver in college, and then he switched to quarterback his senior season, 4.65, Deshaun Watson, 4.66, Justin Herbert, 4.68. So you put Derek Carr at 4.69. Like, that's right. Like, that's right there. Like, that is legitimate athleticism at the quarterback position. The funniest. Go ahead. Lamar did not run a 40.
Okay.
The only time 40 I could find for him was in like prep, and he ran like a 4.77. But like, that's not fair. Like, I'm not going to say he has a 4.77 40 because there's just no way. Like, maybe when he was 16 years old, he ran a 4.77.
Right.
But yeah, and so like, that would tell you that there are a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL that would be considered kind of dual threat quarterbacks that ran a much slower 40 time. You know who has the slowest 40 time I could find of all the quarterbacks that I like had listed 40s that like participated in the combine? Can you guess who it is?
Like, of current quarterbacks of all time?
Yes, of non-retired quarterbacks. Now, Tom Brady is
Okay.
the answer when he is in the NFL because he has the most hilarious 40 time of 5.28, which is almost a third, which is like a third of a second slower than anyone else I could find on this list. It's just kind of hilarious.
I guess I'll go Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins, 4.93. Pretty slow, but not the slowest.
Who beats him?
Jameis Winston.
No.
Yeah, which surprised me. Like, I don't think of Jameis Winston as kind of a slow guy because he does move pretty well, but he has the slowest 40 of anyone that I found currently that, and it's not really fair because there are backups that, probably ran slower times. I don't know. I looked him up because he's on the Saints and he's just kind of an outlier on this list. But he ran a 4.97, which is really slow. And honestly, it's telling of how good he was in college and how enamored everyone was with his skill set that like they just looked past like a 5-second 40. Like Tom Brady went in the 6th round. Like he had a 5.28, but he went in the 6th round. Jameis was number 1 overall. So I think that tells you just how good he was in college.
I was going to say, yeah, and it doesn't mean he's not a good quarterback. And obviously, too, he was such a skilled pitcher in college as well. It's pretty amazing that, you wouldn't think he'd register higher in the speed category as with his feet when obviously his
home plate
his
in a
arms
game.
are doing good.
He stole home plate in a game when he was at Florida State. And maybe he just had a bad day. I don't know. Maybe he didn't get good sleep. The second slowest on this list. Can you guess who it is? It's tied with Kirk Cousins.
What's that?
It's tied with Kirk Cousins.
Tied with Cousins.
Started 14 games last season.
I was going to say Tannehill.
No, Andy Dalton. 4.93. So that's what's funny to me is Jeff Ireland is out there saying, I want dual threat quarterbacks. I like dual threat quarterbacks. And the Saints last year employed 2 of the slowest quarterbacks in the NFL.
That's the last
and then
thing we
Taysom
had.
Hill.
Right.
Yeah. And Taysom Hill ran a 4.4. Taysom Hill is not a quarterback. Like he ran like he and Justin Fields ran 4.4. And so like that's not a dual threat quarterback. That's a running back. But I do think it's interesting. And like guys, Derek Carr ran a faster 40 than.
What was Ian Book's 40?
He had a fast 40. I think it was like 4.59. Let's see. I look it up.
Good old Ian Book.
I remember tweeting about it. Yeah, he ran a 4.59.
Okay.
Yeah. So guys, Derek Carr ran a faster 40 than.
So Jeff Ireland was all in on Ian Book right there.
Yeah. So Derek Carr ran a 4.8 or 4.69. So Brock Purdy 4.84.
Okay.
Jones, who I would classify as a dual threat quarterback easily. 4.81. So that's significantly slower. Matt Stafford, slow guy, 4.81. Pat Mahomes 4.8. Dak Prescott 4.79. Aaron Rodgers 4.75. Kenny Pickett 4.73. I just thought it was interesting. And like when you look at, and I think to me, that is one of the elements that is kind of an intangible that you can't really measure when you're watching a guy play, where he's able to create when nothing is there, where he's able to create when things break down. And he might not be the best in the NFL at it, right? He might be the worst of the quarterbacks that you can trust to make guys miss. But he is on that list. And I had someone say this to me, and I think it's telling, or I think it's an accurate way to look at it is the 12th best quarterback in the NFL doesn't sound like a great thing until you don't have a top 12 quarterback. And then it's like the stuff you dream about. And I think that's what Derek Carr is. I think he's a top 12 quarterback. Is he number 12? Maybe, but he's a top 12 guy. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it. And it's like, if you have a top 3rd quarterback in the NFL, that's probably worth quarterback money, and that's what you're paying. And that's kind of just where I am with it. And that's kind of the research I've done over the last couple of days. I'm trying to decide whether this is actually worth the deal. And I think I've landed on the side of like, I think he does enough that it would make sense for the Saints to bring him in if they can.